It's a two-part policy, and what's changed is the emphasis has shifted between the two parts. So from the very first moment when Hamas targeted, murdered, tortured and kidnapped Israeli civilians on October 7, the Australian government has firmly defended Israel's right to defend itself. That's part one. Part two has been to call on Israel to observe the laws of armed combat. What's happened over the 5 weeks is that the emphasis has shifted increasingly onto calls on Israel to respect the laws of armed combat and to do its utmost to protect civilians. That's been the same trend, that same shift in emphasis has occurred across all the Western countries which have been the main supporters of Israel, but broadly across the entire world.
It is a somewhat different approach to some of our closest countries in Southeast Asia, with Indonesia's President Joko Widodo saying he will carry the Muslim world's message to the White House when he meets Joe Biden at the APEC summit this week. How do you think it'll be received? Will the war feature much on the agenda?
Well, in the initial meeting that Joko Widodo, known universally in Indonesia as Jokowi, in his initial meeting with Joe Biden, we've seen Jokowi very firmly press Joe Biden to do more, as he put it, to restrain Israel from inflicting suffering on the Palestinian people. Jokowi is the leader of the world's most populous Muslim nation. He is speaking, he has said, on behalf of all 57 nations that were represented at last week's Organisation of Islamic Cooperation Summit. So that's a large chunk of the world population. And Jokowi, along with the other Muslim majority countries, have put all responsibility on Israel, have called for an immediate ceasefire without any corresponding demands on Hamas. Now, that's different to the Australian position in most Western countries, which are even as calling for a ceasefire as Penny Wong has in Australia's case. Penny Wong has also said that in preparation, we should have steps for a ceasefire which include Hamas freeing the hostages it's holding, and Hamas laying down its weapons and ceasing fire as well. So putting even responsibility both on Hamas and Israel. The Jokowi position, the position of the Muslim majority states, is to put all responsibility and the burden of responsibility onto Israel only. And on your point about whether it will feature at APEC, APEC is supposedly, it stands for Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. It's supposedly all about Asia-Pacific, but it will be difficult to prevent the Israel-Hamas conflict from getting onto the agenda. I'm pretty sure it will be discussed.
And Peter, Joe Biden is also expected to meet President Xi Jinping on US soil tomorrow. What do you think will come out of that meeting?
Well, a bit like the Albanese meeting with Xi Jinping a week or so ago, the main point is simply to resume political contact at the top level. The two leaders haven't met face-to-face for a year. There's been quite a lot of aggravation between the US and China in the intervening period. In particular, though, and the issue that is of greatest importance to Australia and to the stability of the planet, is that the Americans have signalled Joe Biden will ask Xi Jinping to resume military-to-military contact. And the point of that is not just some polite exchange. The point of that is to put in place emergency protocols in the event of incidents where the two navies or air forces of those countries, the US and China, should clash or have some sort of incident. And the idea is that top-level military communication would prevent incidents from escalating into war. Now, the Chinese have cancelled all military-to-military contact. The Americans are keen to get it back. The reason is there's an asymmetry of risk where the Chinese government is happy to put the Americans under pressure and to let them feel at risk from Chinese military manoeuvres, while the US has a much lower appetite for risk and really wants to put in place guardrails, as they call it, to contain the risk. We've yet to see whether the Chinese government is interested, whether Xi Jinping is prepared to agree to those conditions.
Meanwhile, Anthony Albanese has called its new security and migration pact with Tuvalu as Australia's most significant agreement with a Pacific island nation. Why is it so important?
Yes, it is a big deal, Yvonne, for a small country, or at least it's small in population. It's only got a population of 11,000. It's one of the least populous countries on the planet. But it does occupy its 9 main islands occupy a large swathe of the Pacific Ocean. And it is a contested region, as we know, because the Chinese Communist Party has been seeking and is continuing to seek a growing foothold in the South Pacific Island states. Australia, the US and Japan and other allies are trying to counter that because for Australia, of course, it's our strategic hinterland, and it's a terrible policy failure of Australia that allowed the situation to develop where the Solomon Islands last year signed a security pact with China. So this agreement with Tuvalu, first of all, is designed to block China out of any close security relationship with Tuvalu, or Tuvalu, I should say. But the other real precedent it sets here for the world, Yvonne, is that Australia has basically accepted responsibility for all of the population of a country, small in this case, but the entire population of a country, to take refuge in Australia as their islands become increasingly unhospitable, uninhabitable due to climate change. So that's a developed country taking responsibility for an underdeveloped country and giving its entire population the opportunity for an orderly evacuation, or as the Pacific Island leaders prefer to call it, migration with dignity, to evacuate their country. This is a global precedent, a sign of our times, and a remarkable responsibility that Australia has now assumed in this case with Tuvalu, and other countries in the Pacific may now look to Australia for similar arrangements for their populations.
Peter, as always, great to get your analysis. Thank you so much.
Pleasure, Yvonne.